This is what Singapore was like 60 years ago when it gained its independence, and this is how it looks today, certainly. Singapore is often praised for its low corruption, efficient government, and one of the highest per capita incomes in the world, making it seem like an ideal country. However, behind this success story, there is a more complex reality. The so-called Singapore economic miracle came at a cost to its population, and it now appears to be losing steam. Singapore residents are stressed, overwhelmed, and exhausted as the country runs out of space and becomes increasingly expensive. For the first time in decades, the city-state is facing a housing crisis, and the population is rapidly aging, with few babies being born. Moreover, people are becoming upset with the large number of foreigners moving there. The way they used to do things, which worked for so long, no longer seems to be effective. But how did they get into this situation? What was the price of this success, and why is it no longer working? This is the dark side of the Singapore economic miracle. When Singapore gained independence, no one thought that the small country surrounded by much larger neighbors had a future. It was suffering from high unemployment, food shortages, and a lack of space. With 70% of its population living in extreme poverty, half being illiterate, and a third living in one of the world's worst slums. But Singapore had an advantage. Its first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, who led Singapore for over 3 decades and was the man behind its economic miracle. Lee Kuan Yew declared that the only resources Singapore had were its people and their hard work. And this essentially describes what made its incredible development possible. First, as Singapore had neither money nor a skilled workforce, it decided to attract as much foreign investment as possible and become a hub for global companies coming to Asia. Singapore had an excellent location as a naval center and offered a stable government, efficiency, and truly business-friendly policies such as tax exemptions for foreign companies for 10 years and no labor unions. As an increasing number of Western companies chose Singapore as their regional headquarters, they brought their money, people, and a lot of knowledge. Second, to make the most of people's potential, Lee Kuan Yew established that meritocracy would be crucial in Singapore. This means that in society, people are rewarded based on what they deserve, their skills and performance, allowing talented individuals to achieve success regardless of where they come from. More than anything, this defined Singapore's education system and its streaming practice. Basically, from childhood, children in Singapore's schools are constantly subjected to standardized tests and ranked based on their results. Those with good results advance and have access to better schools and educational programs, allowing the system to help the most capable students reach their maximum potential. Third, to make the most of Singapore's main resource, its people, Lee Kuan Yew made sure that another fundamental principle of the country was constant hard work. He was not only famous for working very hard himself, but also encouraged Singaporeans to do the same, emphasizing that hard work was the only way to make the small country progress. The government has echoed this message ever since, communicating it through national productivity campaigns, targeting people from childhood. Finally, the growth caused by all these factors was driven by a huge increase in the population, which more than tripled since independence in the 1980s. The government adopted flexible immigration policies that attract tens of thousands of people each year to live and work in Singapore. This brought in both lower-skilled manual workers and highly skilled foreign talents who work in the knowledge economy. To further increase the number of people, the government has carried out campaigns encouraging people to have more children. One of them is called "Have 3 or More If You Can Afford It." There was even a song sponsored by Mentos encouraging people to have babies on Singapore's National Day. This is Singapore's secret to success.
National Night.
What?
You see, this August the 9th, it's time to do our civic duty.
And this is where the story usually ends. But there's a much darker side to this story, because the same principles that were so successful for Singapore also created a new set of problems they now have to deal with. But how did this happen? In Singapore, there's a term called kiasu, which basically means the fear of falling behind or the fear of losing. This reflects the mindset of Singaporeans and how both the country and its people view the world as a rigorous competition, where one must always be alert and strive to succeed. But kiasu is not just a meaningless word. According to sociologists and psychologists studying it, kiasu is actually a real cultural and psychological trait. It can be described as an obsessive concern to make the most of every situation and a compulsive desire to outperform others. While this mindset has some positive effects, such as people striving to work as hard as they can, It also has serious negative impacts on people. Singaporeans dislike their jobs more than any other nation in the world and are one of the most stressed and overwhelmed societies. Research also shows that the kiasu mentality directly leads to higher conformity, lower self-esteem, and reduced individual creativity. In other words, the system and the mindset make people feel worthless and stifle their ability to generate and pursue new ideas. This is a paradox because, while hard work is good for the economy, self-esteem and creativity are essential requirements for success in business and entrepreneurship. If the obsession with hard work is killing these qualities, perhaps it's not such a good trade-off. But where did this behavior come from? Basically, it's the other side of Singapore's success. Since independence, Singapore has seen itself as a small and vulnerable country, constantly in existential danger and needing to work harder than everyone else to survive. This national survival mentality reflects how people approach life on a personal level, with a fear of falling behind. At the same time, while Singapore is very advanced and has a high quality of life with one of the highest per capita GDPs in the world, living there is not straightforward. From a young age, you go through a highly effective education system in Singapore that produces students with some of the best results in standardized tests. However, this system is incredibly stressful. Like in South Korea, after-school extra classes are common in Singapore. But what makes the difference is that, from an early age, test results can decide your future due to the selection process. How you perform in a test in primary school can influence which secondary school and university you will attend. If you want to work for the government, the country's largest employer, you need to show your test performance from the age of 16, and individual grades are crucial for getting a job in the public or private sector. It's no surprise that students in Singapore are much more stressed and prone to anxiety than in other countries, and it doesn't get much better when you're an adult. Despite the government's efforts, the country has limited resources, and while Singapore has high wages, it makes certain things more expensive than elsewhere, such as housing. Due to limited space and a growing population, private homes in Singapore are very expensive and hard to afford for most people unless they have a very high income. To address this issue, the government has built public housing and sold or rented apartments for 99 years at a relatively low price, ensuring that all families have a place to live. But in recent years, the government has not been able to build enough houses to meet the demand, and waiting lists for new apartments are desperately over capacity. Additionally, people have been selling their public housing in the unregulated secondary market at very high prices. Currently, Singapore is dealing with a rapidly growing housing bubble. The housing situation has become a major source of stress for more and more people. The expensive and competitive life in Singapore is one of the main reasons the country has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, even lower than Japan's. In surveys, people often cite financial reasons for not wanting to have children. This is particularly problematic for Singapore because one of its growth strategies has always been the constant increase of the population. However, as Singaporeans have fewer and fewer children, this growth becomes literally unsustainable. Singapore's population, its only and most important resource, would start rapidly declining if not for immigration at extremely high levels. But there's a problem. Life in Singapore is already highly competitive, and many people are starting to feel uncomfortable with the growing immigration to the country, especially when it comes to highly skilled immigrants. Some believe that these immigrants are competing for jobs with local citizens. However, Singapore needs immigration because its population is rapidly aging, and without the arrival of new immigrants, it will soon become a nation with a predominantly elderly population. The challenge is that the strategy Singapore has used for success so far, increasing the population and keeping it productive, may no longer work. Even if people continue to work tirelessly, it won't be enough without an increased population. And if people don't feel financially secure about their future, they won't be happy with the arrival of more immigrants, considering that the competition for life is already intense. Therefore, Singapore's success and future are more uncertain than they may seem.